Good morning. It is good to be together this morning. Good to have you here. If you are visiting with us, thank you so much for coming our way, blessing us with your presence, and we hope that you'll come back and do it again. I'm in Job chapter 14 this morning, going to take a small pit stop in chapter 12 and 13 to get to 14, and I hope you'll join me there. Isn't it a joy? Isn't it just fun to sing about the resurrection? To sing about and to think about the fact that Jesus lives and He is alive. And He died for you and I so that He could release us from the difficulties of sin and the burdens and the chains that Satan wants to hold us in with as we face the realities of life. And you know, death is one of those realities, right? Nobody enjoys death. Nobody wants to die. Nobody celebrates the time of... I understand we try to encourage by celebrating the life of one who has died, but we're not celebrating the fact that death has occurred because we just don't like death. Death is very, very difficult, and admitting our futility is very, very hard. And yet, that's what the 14th chapter of the book of Job is all about. Zophar has been telling Job, what do you expect? I mean, chapter 11 is Zophar's response to Job, or his inquiring of him, and he says, what do you expect? What more do you think would happen? Do you have this pie in the sky kind of mentality to think that, this is just life? Come on, Job, just accept reality and let's move on. And Job says, beginning in chapter 12, he says, God has done some pretty awesome things. He says in verse 4 of chapter 12, I have become a laughing stock. He says, when I really look around and see what all God has done, I am just at wit's end to know how to even respond. When I look at all the majesty and power, all the awesomeness, the holiness and righteousness of God, he says, and all that He's done is right. I know it is. I don't doubt or question, or I don't think for a moment that what God has done is not right, because I know it is. And thus I have become the laughing stock here, in that you three have come in here and here you are pointing fingers at me, and I'm trying to claim innocence in this deal, and you're laughing at me. You're laughing at me because of what you believe and what God has done, and all of this isn't making sense, and therefore I've become a laughing stock. He says in chapter 13, beginning in verse 15, though God slay me, I will hope in Him. Though God slay me, I will hope in Him. Yet I will argue my ways to His face. This will be my salvation, that the godless shall not come before Him. You see, in chapter 12, Job says, man, look at what all God's done. Look at how awesome God is. Look at where I stand in light and in contrast and in relation to God. And then chapter 13, he says, you want to know where my hope is? My hope is in the Lord. I will remain steadfast, and I will go to the point of death with the Lord, putting all my hope and trust in Him. Because in chapter 14, he says, hey, I know death's coming. If you and I were to break down chapter 14, I would just summarize it into these three words. It's humanity, futility, and integrity. Job says, I'm a human. Notice what he says in verse 1 of chapter 14. I was born of woman, as man is. And because of that, there will be a few days and then there will be trouble. There'll be trouble on all sides. It's just part of humanity. Life is not a bed of roses always. Life is not always sunshine. After all, tropical storms come through and they rain for days, don't they? And it's gloomy and it's cloudy and it's depressing and that's life. Some days in life are going to be difficult. Some days in life are going to be filled with trouble. Some days in life are going to be very hard because I am human. It's humanity. And you can blame it on Satan. You can blame it on choices. You can blame it on bad choices, poor choices that happen in my own life or that happen in the life of another. The reality of it is that we're human. And none of us are perfect. And we all make bad choices. And sometimes those consequences are long and hard. And sometimes it's the bad choices of someone else. And that brings trouble into our lives. And we have to deal with the consequences of that. And sometimes it's long and it's hard. I don't know any other way to say it than it's humanity. It's flesh. It's carnal. It's worldly. Job describes it like this in verse 2. He says, we're like a flower that springs forth. And it blooms out, and then before long the petals start to fall. And it isn't but just a season later that, and sometimes it's not even a season later, that the flower has withered completely away. It flees like a shadow and it does not continue. And you do open your eyes on such a one and bring me into judgment. Who will bring a clean thing out of an unclean? There is not one, because again, this is all humanity. Peter, in describing the word of the Lord, he says man is like grass. Man is like a flower. Humanity appears for a little while and then it vanishes away. It comes up for a season and then it goes away. It's called humanity. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic here. I'm just trying to be real. Humanity comes up for a season and then it goes away. And he says in verse 5, their days are determined. The number of months is with you. You have appointed, and it has limits that cannot be passed. Job admitting the reality that God has appointed to you and I a number of days. He's appointed to you and I a number of months, a number of years, and there's a limit to that, and try as you may. I realize that we have one biblical record of where prayer extended the king's life for 15 years. What an awesome blessing that is. And I would certainly not stand here and tell you that God can't continue to extend life, because He certainly can. And I would be very wrong to stand up here and suggest that there's not power in prayer, because James 5 says very clearly that there is. And so to say that God couldn't or wouldn't extend our years would be not in my realm of authority to speak. But I do realize, as Job did in verse 5, that there is a time, there is a season, there is a day, there is a month, there is a year in which God has appointed, and it's called humanity. The day we were born was the day we began to die. It's the day we began to march toward that day, that month, that year, that season, that limit. Because all of us have limits. And it's called humanity. What an awesome privilege it is to serve a God who don't have limits. He can do anything. He can exist forever and will. He's not confined or constrained or chained down or bound by these limitations. Thus making the passage in Philippians chapter 2 all the more real for me when the Bible says that Jesus turned loose of that. You see, I don't even know what that is. I can't even imagine being equal with God. I can't imagine being divine. I can't imagine being just spiritual in that I have no limitations as a human, because I do. And that's all I know. But Jesus chose willingly to take on that limitation, to take on humanity, recognizing there was absolutely an appointed day and month and limit to His life on this earth. That ultimately it would end at the cross, and He knew that before He ever started. And to think that He would do it anyway. To subject Himself, to humble Himself, to lower Himself, if you will, Philippians chapter 2, into this thing we call humanity. Job began to ask this question in verse 7. He says, is humanity like a tree? And it's in verse 7 that I began to move into this realm of futility. When you think about humanity and all of the great things that humanity has to offer, there is this overwhelming, umbrelloing futility about it. It's not going to live up to what it's supposed to be. It's not going to live up to the hype that some people make it out to be. It's not going to last forever. It's not always good. It's not what it is when it starts. As we grow older, we realize we're not as young as we used to be, right? My body feels things a little differently now than it once did. I used to could take long days and the hot heat of the sunshine, and it didn't bother me. It bothers me a little bit now. I used to could play ball and game after game after game, and get up the next morning and not even realize I'd played a game the night before. I can't do that anymore. I feel it sometimes for days. Although I still enjoy doing it and I subject my body to it, I realize that there is this body, there's a futility to it. It's not what it's all about. And all the time and the effort we spend on this body. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be disciplined, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have self-control, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't take care of ourselves. Please don't misunderstand me. But recognize that as well as you do or I do, it is going to be futile in terms of physicality, because this body's just not going to last. Job says, how about the tree? You know, there's hope for the tree, isn't there? Well, absolutely there is. You cut it down, verse 7, it'll sprout again. Its roots go down deep into the earth, and though its stump may die, that could certainly happen, yet at the scent of water it will bud again and pour out branches like a young plant. I don't even know what kind of tree it is in our backyard, but there's this little tree in our backyard, and bless them, whoever planted it there. I wished I could find them. This tree just comes out everywhere. I mean, there's little shoots that literally, if you don't weed eat them every week, they just take over. And this little bitty shoot that will just be chopped off by the weed eater, in 2 or 3 weeks it becomes something that takes some clippers, you know. And in a few months it becomes something that would take a chainsaw or a blade of sorts. And I mean, this one tree, you know, it just keeps on giving. And I just wished it'd die. And take all them little shoots with it. But here's what I know. I know that even if the main tree were to die, all this would still happen around it. Boy, isn't that a wonderful scene of life? Isn't it a wonderful scene of hope? That though this main tree might die one day, that all these little All these little offspring. And Job says, man, a tree's got that. Because its roots go down deep into the earth, and though it be chopped down, it can sprout forth again. What about man? Verse 10, he says, no, man's not like that. You see, man dies and he's buried. He's laid low and he breathes his last. You see, man's not like a tree, verse 11. He's like water that runs out of the lake, and when it's gone, it's gone. He's like the river that wastes away, and if it doesn't be replenished somehow, it'll dry up. And though it's pale, and though it's gloomy, and though it's dark, it's reality. And we don't envision ourselves being planted and coming up again as though it were to reincarnate or to have new life. We don't believe that. We have this one life. Here it is, right now. And when it's gone, it's gone. When our last has been breathed, it will be our last. And so man lies down, verse 12, and he does not rise again. I jump down to verse 18 because he gives this gloom conclusion here, and he says, but, verse 18. Now the but's in contrast to what I skipped, and what I skipped is verse 13 through 17 that Ryan read a moment ago. Because in verses 13 through 17, there's hope. There's possibility. There's light shed on this. But, verse 18, you jump down and get Job's conclusion here. But the mountain falls away. It crumbles. Rock is removed from its place. The water wears away the stone. They wash away the soul of the earth. They destroy the hope of man. You, O Lord, prevail against him, and he passes. You change his countenance and send him away. His sons come to honor, and he does not know it. They're brought low, and he perceives it not. He feels only the pain. That's what we've been talking about, right? Futility. Futility. The futility of humanity. He feels only the pain of his body, and he mourns for himself. The ache, the pain, the struggle, the trouble, the trials, Job says in verse 1, that are full, that are multiplied. They began to wear, and they began to burden, and they began to break down, and they began to cause struggle within the human body because there's a futility about it. But yet, in all of this, Job says, I will maintain my integrity. Am I human? Yes. Is humanity futile? Yes. But can humanity be people of integrity? And the answer is yes. So in all of this, even as becoming a laughing stock in chapter 12 because of what all God has done, and recognizing that it is God who will lay me low, and so I am going to hope in Him, and my salvation will be in Him, and thus I will maintain through all of this. Though I am a man and I'm born of woman, and my days are full of trouble. Though my days, my months, my seasons, my years are set at a limit by God. Though I'm not like a tree, and though my end will come, and my last I will breathe. And there will be no possibility for a new shoot to arise to replace that tree called me. What I know is that through all of that, I will maintain my integrity. Oh, that you would hide me, verse 13, in Sheol. There's some lessons we need to get out of this, maybe 3, maybe 4. And they're just common things that I don't know how often we need to be reminded of them, but what I do know is that every time I'm reminded, there is a stark reality that goes off within my mind. The first one is, life is short. Life is short. So overstated, so simple, so easy to understand, yet so likely to forget. Life is short. Oh, that God would hide me in Sheol. There's coming a time when God will take me to the place of the dead. I don't know how He'll do it. I don't know what form that'll be in. Neither do you. But the reality of it is that He will. He'll take us to the place of the grave, to the place of Hades, to the place of Sheol. Job said, oh, that I could be taken there so that I could be hidden from God's wrath. Life is short. Psalm 90 and verse 10 tells us, 70 years, quoting the King James Version, maybe by reason of chance, 80. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 16 tells us that we need to redeem the time or make the most of the time or use the time wisely because the days are evil. James 4 tells us life is but a vapor that appears for life is short. Then it vanishes away. Oh, that God would hide me in Sheol, that He would conceal me, verse 13, till the wrath was past, that He would appoint me a set time and remember me. Lesson number 2, there will come a resurrection. Life has a resurrection. Life is short. We must all die. The authors of Hebrews make it very clear. We have an appointment. And it is appointed to us. God has set the day, the month, the season, the life, however you want to look at that. God has set a limit to us. And the time will come when we will die and go to Sheol, but God will remember us. Notice what Job says, and I don't know what he understood about what he said here in verse 14. If a man dies, shall he live again? Now, you and I, sitting here, reading this, looking at this from our perspective and knowledge and understanding, we answer yes. Yes. He won't live again like the tree does physically, but he will live again spiritually. Because there is coming this thing, life involves a resurrection. Read the passage in 1 Corinthians 15. Understand what Paul meant when he said in verse 19, if we have hoped in this life only in Christ, we're miserable. Read what he means when you get down to verses 42 through 48, and he talks about this moment, this twinkling of an eye, this changing, this imperishable, this perishable putting on imperishability rather, this mortal putting on immortality. When that resurrection occurs, life involves resurrection. God will remember us. Though we die, yes, we will live again. There will be look at the end of verse 14, there will be a renewal. Some translations say change. Some translations say relief. There will be a collecting. There will be a change. There will be a renewal. There will be a transformation. The book of Revelation, in the 20th chapter, into the 21st chapter, into the 22nd chapter, beginning in the 20th chapter, what we have is we have death and Hades. We have the realm of the dead giving up those who are in it. There will be a remembering. There will be a resurrection. In that resurrection, there will be involved a second death that you and I don't want to be a part of. And the book of Revelation talks a lot about that. You would call, verse 15, and I would answer. You long for the work of your hands, for then you would number my steps. You would keep watch over my sin. As you come into the end of verse 16 and into chapter 17, my transgression would be sealed up in a bag, and you would cover it over my iniquities. A third lesson that you and I need to realize is that life is about turmoil. Life is about trouble. Life is about difficulties. It involves it. It includes it because of humanity and because of futility. But yet through all of our troubles, we can maintain our integrity. How? Why? By what means? And the answer is found at the end of verse 16 and the beginning of verse 17. That God would watch over our sin and seal up our transgressions and cover them. What a blessing. Yeah, life is short. We're all going to die. It's a reality. 70, 80 at best. It's still short. It's but a moment. It's just a flash. It's only the dash between 2 years. It's brief. But yet life involves a resurrection. There will come a day when the trumpet of God will sound and the voice of the archangel will cry out, and all those who have died will rise to a spiritual life, to a different life, to a life of eternality, to meet God in judgment and to be separated, where all nations will be separated. And the goats will go one way and the sheep will go the other. The righteous will go one way and the unrighteous will go another way. And the unrighteous will go the way of the second death, where there is a lake of fire. Life is filled with turmoil. Involved in turmoil is temptation. And because of temptation, you and I are able to fall. And because of temptation, thanks to humanity and futility, you and I have the opportunity to give up our integrity and to lose our hope because of our sin and because of our iniquity. And what I see at the end of verse 16 and verse 17 is I see God with His cotton sack. And I see God taking all my sin and all my iniquity, and I see Him stuffing it in that cotton sack. And though the longer I live, and the more poor choices I make, the heavier the bag grows as the day goes on. And yet God is still willing to continue to stuff my sin and my iniquity in that bag and to seal it up, to cover it up, and to take it away. Though there be turmoil, though there be trials, though there be temptations, though there be failures, though there be sin, God is willing to make it all right, to cover it all up, to put it all away, to put it in a bag and to haul it off, far removed from me, thanks to forgiveness and thanks to His willingness to remember my sin no more. What a blessing. What hope. What opportunity. What joy. What privilege. That though death is a reality, there is a bright light on the other side. And I do hope it's bright for you. This song for me is just a sobering song, because it asks the question that we all need to be asking ourselves daily. Is it well with your soul? Are you a child of God? Are you one living faithfully within the family of God? Is it well? Though death be a reality, recognizing there is a resurrection involved, and there is life after death, if you will. And there is the opportunity. It don't have to be gloomy. It don't have to be dark. It don't have to be dreaded. It can be embraced with joy and hope if it is well with my soul. Is it well with your soul? If not, can we help you as together we stand and sing?